Good evening. My name is Darren Reesberg. I'm the Executive Director at the Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago. And I want to thank you all for coming here tonight for what I know will be an insightful discussion with Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, both of Google and the recent authors of the book, The New Digital Age, Reshaping the Future of People, Nations, and Business. And thank you to Chicago Booth for partnering with us, both with respect to this event as well as the reception, which we hope you'll all join right afterwards. In just a few moments, the University of Chicago college student Forrest Schofield, who's here to my right, will introduce Eric, Jared, and our moderator and my colleague, Steve Edwards. But before he does that, I just wanted to quickly remind you of some upcoming Institute of Politics events. We have tomorrow evening from 6:30 to 7:30 at the Quadrangle Club, a look inside the White House with a panel of individuals who have recently left working within the White House, moderated by Kent Walsh, who is the White House correspondent for U.S. News and World Report, who recently has published a book called Prisoners of the White House, which looks inside the White House bubble. And on that panel will be two of our Institute of Politics fellows, John Favreau, President Obama's chief speechwriter, and Chris Liu, President Obama's cabinet secretary. Given the goings-on of this week, we think those from the White House who will be on that panel will have an interesting perspective on what that might be like to deal with, and we're interested in hearing from them on that. We also have our fellows continuing to meet weekly, and we hope that you'll join those. We know we have a number of business school students here, and Bethany McLean, the financial journalist, is a fellow with us this quarter and has been doing really interesting things with her fellow seminar. And so if you need more information about that, please visit our website. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to UChicago student Forrest Schofield, who is a third year at the college, political science major, hailing from Alaska. Forrest is a self-taught programmer who recently helped create web crawlers that collect product data from all across the internet for a website called Priceonomics, which intends to be a price guide for everything. Forrest also created Hack at UChicago, which is the largest tech-related student organization here on campus to share his passion for programming with his peers. So please join me in welcoming Forrest, who will introduce our panel.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm personally really excited to be at this event tonight because it involves two fields, technology and politics. And I find ideas at the intersection of the two to be particularly interesting. As we move into the new digital age that Jared and Eric describe in their book, I think some of the world's most important technology problems won't be solved by teams of engineers alone. We'll instead require diverse groups of people from multidisciplinary backgrounds. On that note, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Institute of Politics for hosting this event and for their continued support of this kind of discussion. Our speakers here tonight bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table in both technology and politics. Eric Schmidt is a software engineer turned executive who holds the distinction of working at two of the coolest centers of innovation and technology in the 1970s, AT&T's Bell Labs and Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center. He was also one of the first employees at Sun Microsystems, where he eventually became CTO. He served as the chief executive for Novell Corporation and Google, where he is currently the executive chairman. He also holds a BS in electrical engineering from Princeton University and an MS and PhD in computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. Most recently, Eric has become a member of President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology and the Prime Minister's Advisory Council in the United Kingdom. Thank you for being here tonight, Eric.
Good.
To his left, his co-author, Jared Cohen, has extensive experience in the intersection of geopolitics and technology, having conducted research around the world in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, as well as several locations in Africa. He is the author of several books, including Children of the Jihad and 100 Days of Silence. Along with the book, he co-authored with Eric The New Digital Age, which will be discussed shortly. Jared is one of the few people to have served as an advisor to both Secretaries of State, Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton, and is currently a member of the National Counterterrorism Center's Directors Advisory Board. He holds a BA from Stanford University and a master's in philosophy from the University of Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. He currently helps and helped found. He runs and helped found Google Ideas, a think tank that applies technology solutions to some of the world's most important geopolitical issues, among other things. And we're very honored to have him here tonight. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Steve Edwards, who is currently the Deputy Director of Programming at the Institute of Politics, and an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared on BBC, Bloomberg News, PBS, and numerous other public radio stations in the United States. Recently, he has spent over 14 years at WBEZ Chicago, hosting the shows The Afternoon Shift and 848. So with that being said, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the Institute of Politics and everyone here at the university to our two guests tonight, Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Forrest. Forrest, thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Before we jump into this, I should just say that we want to deliver as much of this conversation as possible to you. So we're going to talk for a few minutes to frame out some of the ideas in this book, which is absolutely fascinating. If you haven't had a chance to pick it up, there are copies for sale out in the lobby. And we want you then to carry some of this questioning as well with your own thoughts and ideas and reactions to what Eric and Jared have had to say. What's fascinating about this book, among many other things, is that they are envisioning a world that is, yes, in the future, but in some respects within grasp. It's only 5, 10, 15 years ahead, in some cases a few decades, and what the implications will be for us as individuals, societies, nation states, non-state actors, diplomacy, foreign policy, and the like. And so one of the things that these two gentlemen have been doing is they've been traveling the world. You said 30 countries you've been to? In what period of time, roughly?
Well, since we've been to 30 plus countries together and then individually have both been to a number as well.
Of course. So together on these visits to different countries, what is it that you've started to uncover about the future of the digital age and its impact in various corners of the world?
Well, let me start by saying it's great to be back in Chicago. I spent 18 months here working on the Obama campaign, and I really fell in love with the city. And you're very fortunate to be able to be here, and I'm really glad to be back. When we traveled together, we learned some fundamental lessons. And I think perhaps the most important is that the world is going to be changed very dramatically by the arrival of mobile phones. And that the things that we take for granted, the connectivity, the access, and so forth, are important to us, all of you, online, all the time. We all know what we're talking about there. But they are dramatic, life-changing events for people who've never had information, never had access, always been subject to terrible things from their governments, live in a world that's not responsive to their needs. Whether it's in medicine or entertainment or in education, in that one device, when it arrives, their lives change in ways that are profoundly important to them.
Well, the one thing that I would add is part of the reason we wrote this book is we were tired of the debate that's dominated the present, which is really centered around this question of, is technology good or is technology bad? We argue it has an empowerment bias, empowering people both for good and for ill, but that debate completely ignores the inevitability of it. So with 5 billion new people coming online in the next decade, most of those people are coming online in parts of the world where there's conflict, instability, where the governance model is autocratic and repressive. And Eric and I wanted to go out and meet some of these future users, understand their challenges, understand and speculate about how technology may complicate them or make them better.
What are some of the ways in which their lives become more complicated as they move to an interconnected
Well,
world?
they begin to have doubt. You know, if you live in North Korea, there's only one way to think, because there's no other source of information. There's no political information, there's no critical information, there's no scientific information, there's no information at all. And so maybe human beings are better off without doubt. Sorry, that was a joke. Not a very good one, but you get the point. But part of our thesis is that if you give people who have been subject to this sort of rote memorization, this is the way to think, that they will be able to use their critical thinking skills. Now, we'll probably all give them like anxiety as well, because all of a sudden they're going to say, look at all this stuff I didn't know.
And one of the things that we speculate about in the book is if you look at one of the things that is really a tragedy in humanity, which is persecution of ethnic minorities, religious minorities, different groups. It may be the case that in the physical world, this becomes harder to do without individuals catching everything on phones, and in some respects that might deter certain acts of violence. But we speculate in the book about discrimination moving to the online world. So we're in a university setting. We're all familiar with cyberbullying. What happens when cyberbullying becomes state-sponsored against a particular ethnic group?
Well, like the Iraqis decide they don't like the Kurds, so they just delete their internet connection one day. I mean, you can imagine that kind of stuff.
So let's stay with the example of state leaders. I mean, you've been to North Korea, for instance. If you are a minister in the government of North Korea or Iran or China, for instance, and you look at the coming wave of 5 billion additional people being connected in this way, what are you thinking about?
They're trying to block. They're just trying to stop it.
Sure.
And the great thing about the internet and the kind of stuff we're talking about is you cannot stop it. It will eventually get in somehow. And so they're doing everything they can. So currently, if you take a look at China, they understand they can't prevent the internet from coming into the country. They need it, but they filter information that they don't like. And that works if you don't like Falun Gong. So you can't really talk about that. Or Google, recently largely exited, like us either. But even within China, you have a site called Weibo, which is the internal equivalent of Twitter and Facebook, which has had a huge impact on their government because the government, as usual, covers up what it's up to, because no government likes to be exposed for being incompetent. People in Weibo say, hey, look, the dam broke. And then the government said, which dam? It's sort of the nature of the conversation in China. And then it's putting pressure on the government to fess up. And mostly, by the way, on these environmental issues.
And one of the things that Eric and I talk about extensively in the book is we speculate about dictators' dilemmas in the future.
Which is a great thing.
Yeah, we really like the idea of dictators having more dilemmas, and all of you should too. And those of you who don't believe in that probably have some kind of other motive. But we would argue that in the future, the virtual population of countries will significantly exceed their physical population. So let's take a dictatorship, Iran. 72 million people populate that country. In the future, when everybody in Iran is connected, it's going to look more like 500 million Iranians online. That's going to be because they have multiple email accounts and multiple social networking profiles, and people around the world looking to sort of be mischievous, change their settings so it looks like they're in Iran. So if you're a dictator in the future, with all of these voices and all of this online activity, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's noise. And where they overreact and where they underreact is ultimately where miscalculations will provoke the population in ways that are unsettling to them.
But this is not, at least the story you paint here, is not just a picture entirely of individual empowerment. You also say that authoritarian regimes, that states of all stripes, can actually use and will likely use this technology in ways that are oppressive, that undermine intellectual property, that undermine state security, et cetera, et cetera. So how do those things play out in regimes like this?
Well, one of the arguments we make is for dictatorships in the future, those that have natural wealth to sell will do the equivalent of the minerals for arms trade in cyberspace. So instead of selling oil and natural wealth for guns and tanks, you sell it for surveillance technology from China, to give one example. But one of the other issues that you see in the future with regards to how states behave is, as individuals, I think all of us can relate to the fact that people will just do and say things online that they would never do in the real world. And given that governments are comprised of people, we shouldn't be surprised when the same behavior is true of states. So, for instance, a particular country, let's use China again as an example, they probably wouldn't physically break into various corporations and run out with a bunch of paper, but they have no problem doing the equivalent in cyberspace.
Well, and how significant of an issue is that right now, espionage online?
Well, first place, there's always been espionage between governments, so we shouldn't be surprised that you have the same problem in cyberspace. The question is, at which point do the government actions go from cyber war, if you will, where we're sort of playing with each other and sort of harassing each other, into a real attack? And no one understands this. There's no doctrine of how to handle it. So what happens is there's some error that's made. The cyber attack is a little too aggressive, and it takes out the Chicago water system, for example, which is a major act of war. So then the Chinese, and everybody thinks it's the Chinese, who are usually guilty anyway, right? So the Chinese premier calls up and calls up President Obama and says, it's not us. We didn't do it. I'm really telling you the truth. It's not us this time. So, and let's say in this case, he's being truthful, right? Because they're not stupid people. They're very smart people. How does the president react to that? So that's at the nation state level. What we do see is not just China, but mostly China right now, doing a lot of industrial work to sort of steal essentially intellectual property. And companies and individuals are trying to sort of amp up, if you will, their defenses. Here we are in a university. What do you think the level of security of the network of this university is? Anyone want to guess?
He looks like he knows.
Pretty low, right? We have a programmer here who has an opinion. Forrest, do you have an opinion? Very low, okay. So low and very low. Those are our two bids. So what's the odds that somebody at University of California's, Chicago's computers are being misused by some foreign actor to do something else, going through you, using you for what are called distributed denial of service attacks? Probably pretty high. So this is a common problem. It's not unique to you all at all. And we're working hard in the industry to, again, fix these things, but these are real problems to be addressed over the next few years.
Using the example that you mentioned in terms of the China-U.S. hypothetical, it also brings to mind something else you talk about, which is the way in which diplomacy changes in this new digital era. And you also say at one point that there's a canyon that exists right now between those in the foreign policy establishment globally and what they really understand about technology. You argue for this idea that we're going to have almost two foreign policies or two levels of diplomacy. Why? What does that look like?
Well, part of it is, that's correct. We argue in the book that every state in the future will have to have two foreign policies, one for the physical world and one for cyberspace. Look at the U.S. and China as an example. In the physical world, the relationship's complex, but by all accounts, they're allies. In cyberspace, the relationship looks as adversarial as the one between the physical relationship between U.S. and Iran.
But you also have the diasporas. So many countries have an awful lot of people in other countries that they're sort of their citizens, if you will, but located in the wrong country. So all of a sudden they have a whole strategy to reach them, to get money from them, to get them to be involved, right?
But there's also a positive story that Eric and I talk about at length in the book, which is take a country like Estonia. 1.3 million people, tiny economy. I'm not even sure if they have a military or not. I'm sure there's somebody Estonian here who can tell me. But by all accounts, they're a physically sort of small, not that powerful nation. In cyberspace, they're sending delegations to countries that they don't have embassies with. They have very advanced cybersecurity. They're working with the Tunisian government, the Libyan government, the Burmese government on figuring out how to sort of do e-governance and various other things. And so you could make the argument that Estonia is physically weak, but it's a cyber power. And so a country in the future will have the opportunity to punch above its weight as it pertains to things that it does in cyberspace.
Well, yeah, if you are a cyber power, how might that help advance your economy, your relative position in the world?
Well, part of it is influence, right? So why are we talking about Estonia right now? The president of Estonia literally signs his emails, "You're e-president" from e-Estonia. And I'm being quite serious. And what it's done is it's basically put Estonia on the map, so people like going there.
No, but give another example. What's the one profitable business of Somalia that's legal?
Quasi-legal.
Legal, telecommunications. 11% of the GDP of the country, as best one can measure it, is telecommunications. Why? Because the pirates need to talk too. And the cell phone networks, of which there are 5 or 6, are unregulated, right? So everybody's sort of work that out on unregulated frequencies, and they have prepaid SIM cards.
And of course, there's no formal, to continue on the Somalia example, there's no banks anywhere in Somalia. And yet
no banks to rob?
I'm sure they'll find something else to rob. So there's no banks, and yet you have entire segments of the population accessing bank accounts on their mobile device.
And one of the greatest accomplishments in Africa has been this billions of people who are essentially unbanked in the world, and we take banking for granted. So systems like M-Pesa, which is based out of Kenya, allow you to basically transfer money and so forth off of your SMS-based mobile phone. When we were in Myanmar, Burma, which has just opened up, you show up and you see this nice city and roads and so forth, and you start talking to people, and then you realize that they don't have any banks. Now, how did you operate without a bank? Well, there was a general who would effectively advance you the money. Presumably the general took a share of the profits for himself, but you banked, shall we say, with the government. And because the banks weren't allowed because of sanctions. So now all of a sudden they've got to build banks. They've got to build the tellers. How are they going to do it? They're going to do it with mobile phones. Once they get the internet and the mobile phone network turned on, they advertise 7% connectivity or penetration of mobile devices, but I can tell you that no phone worked at all, period. Right? So that's where they are. So they get a chance to reset to this online banking world, and they will.
Eric and Jared wanted to take as many questions from you as possible. So while I have many more questions, I want to go ahead and open it up to those of you, and then we can filter in as we go. Yes, sir. For those who may not have been able to hear on the far reaches of the room, the essence of the question is what this new digital age might mean for the nation state and whether it will continue to be as relevant in the future.
You know, Tom Friedman, in one of his books maybe 5 years ago, talked about he said that there's a new elite. And this is an elite of people running businesses and think tanks and so forth who see themselves as citizen of the world and not a citizen of their own country. And they have common values. They believe in globalization. They believe in common access. They believe in making money. Indeed, this has become the, if you will, privileged class. The problem with that argument, which I'm obviously very sympathetic to, is it runs into the very real reality of how governments work. And the fact of the matter is that ultimately the governments have guns. And so we argue in the book that while you think you're a citizen of the world, the reality is that the local environment will constrain your behavior. This is not necessarily bad, because the fact that you're a citizen of the world and the fact that you're using the internet will allow you to expose the worst aspects of your country. So for example, there are plenty of countries where women are treated terribly. Right? Jared has this example where imagine the Uber app for Saudi women. Right? You get your app out, you look at it, and you see where what are they called?
The Muhammad.
The religious police that beat women. You can see where they are and you can avoid them. Right? Real innovation in Saudi Arabia. So the problem with your argument is, can you find an island or Abu Dhabi or something where you can sort of do your stuff in secret and not be subject to it? Ultimately, you have to express your business, your politics, your entertainment, whatever it is you're building in physical space, and you're going to be governed. And that's not a bad thing. So use the example of Tor, which is an encrypted tunnel which allows you to have private communication. Eventually, the other side, there's a person, there's a policeman. If they're misbehaving, they'll get caught.
Let's take another question. Yes, right here in front.
Access to those products.
For the benefit of those in the far reaches, the essence of the question is, what's Google's strategy in China to make its products available and to continue to further the access that the Chinese people may have in the future?
This morning we announced at Google I/O that there were 900 million Android activations so far, activating more than 1.5 million per day. There's a large number of those that are in China, and indeed we have huge success for Android in China. As you'd imagine, Chinese citizens are very sophisticated. Because of the censorship laws, we operate out of Hong Kong, so in many cases those people are using essentially the Baidu or other search engine choices in China. And that may be the best that we can do because of these oppressive censorship rules that the Chinese government has.
Let's take another question from over here. Let me go back to you, sir. And yes, you. All right, question there for those who are on the other side. You mentioned the dictator's dilemma, but certainly the dilemma, wouldn't it be even bigger for democratic regimes that have a hard time deciding where to go and where the populace is?
There's definitely a dilemma for both. We argue that the stakes are higher in repressive environments where people's lives are literally on the line in a different kind of way for what they say. But I think that the answer in the future is going to sort of boil down to how you deal with verification. So if we think there's a lot of noise and activity today, imagine how much noise and activity there's going to be in the future. And whether you're a politician or just a citizen trying to consume news and information, it's going to become increasingly difficult to figure out what's real and what's just nonsense. Eric's been lamenting lately at his frustration around the AP Twitter account with everybody sort of assuming that it hadn't been hacked, and he feels like good old-fashioned sort of checking things before selling stock or whatever else is probably a good idea.
Well, it's interesting that your question implies, maybe you didn't mean it this way, this is sort of the lament of America. Our people are wonderful and our government is terrible. I can tell you that refrain is much worse in every other country we've been to. We should be very happy we're sitting here in America, subject to this horrific political system that we have. So let me give you some examples. Europe tied the currency to a gold standard, the euro. Britain trying to decide whether they're going to leave the euro. Pakistan, where they're busy trying to put all the party people in jail and one guy's in the hospital. They just got the other guy who'd been indicted. He's now actually in charge. Burma, we're not quite sure whether the generals are going to give Aung San Suu Kyi the power or take it away. And they wrote the Constitution to prevent her because she has foreign-born children. And in the Constitution, it says you can't be prime minister. I mean, talk about mean.
Verification, you actually talk a lot about in the book, and essentially characterize it as a growth industry for the reasons you described. Help me understand what are some of the mechanisms that you think will be in place to improve our ability to determine what's truthful in terms of news reporting, what's accurate in terms of identity and individual security verification. What does that world look like?
I mean, there's so many different fronts on which we can talk about this. One that I'll highlight because I feel like it's a little more obscure and maybe not touched on is how do we look at atrocities? How do we look at conflict, for instance? You know, as we have more visibility into the world's conflicts than at any other time in history, you know, how individuals on the ground market what's happening has huge implications. You saw this with the Joseph Kony video that sort of captured everybody's attention in Uganda.
Well, you actually made the point. We were sitting in Nigeria, which is well worth going to, by the way. Just bring a guard. And we're talking about these sort of rebel movements. And Jared pointed out that the way you build a rebel movement, he obviously had thought about this when he was younger, is, you know, it's like you know, Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? And you're all sitting there in your rebel movement thing, and you have to project to everyone else that you're a movement of 1 million followers. Well, unfortunately, now with Wikipedia, they're going to say it's just Joe, Bob, and Harry. And the average person is going to say, no, I don't want to join just Joe, Bob, and Harry. So it's possible that the advent of all of these information sources will make it much harder for these crazy people to take over some of these sort of slightly imbalanced situations. And it may, in fact, make the world safer. And certainly reduce the amount of terrorism that comes from such crazy people.
And let's even let's look at a present-day context, which is Syria, which has now been going on for over 2 years. You could imagine in a sort of Syria-type situation in the future, yes, the Red Cross is trying to get in. Yes, there's people on the ground. But who's actually monitoring the photos and the videos to make sure they're not doctored, not incorrectly timestamped? You can imagine this sort of Red Cross equivalent for verification of online content being deployed strategically with a set of expertise. And to Eric's point about rebels in the context of Syria, I remember when I was in grad school, you'd get coffee with fellow students, and people would sort of sit down and sort of speculate about how they were going to be governor by the age of 40. You could imagine the equivalent of I'm a high school student in Syria, and I'm speculating about how I'm going to be a rebel commander to overthrow Bashar al-Assad by the age of 40. In which case, I want to put as much information about myself out in the public domain as possible, so that way when the moment finally happens,
so all those sort of drunk YouTube videos and Facebook posts and all of those are like a mistake if you're going to become a future rebel, or they're good?
I'm probably bad in the Middle East, but it does actually raise another question, Eric, that we've debated, which is, I look at my generation, and so I'm 31. There's a whole bunch of people in my generation who will run for office, and I predict have to drop out of races in unprecedented numbers because of something stupid that they posted online when they were in college.
Raise your hand if you posted something stupid online in your life. We have a few courageous people who admit it. Okay.
But there was a moment, I remember growing up, it was a big deal that Bill Clinton smoked pot, and he denied it and all these things. And then we reached the Bloomberg moment where he was asked about it, and he said, I smoked pot and liked it. And then you have sort of subsequent examples where Obama writes about it in his book. Bush admits to what he had, and the norms just change. So what is going to be the moment at which we just don't care at all about stupid things that people posted about themselves if it was while they were in college?
Well, what does this mean, though?
Actually, I have proposed that we have a policy in America that everyone change their names at 18. And that way you can say, that really wasn't me. That really wasn't me, right? I think with modern face recognition, that might be able to defeat your name change, but we'll see.
I want to get back to questions from everybody here, and I'm going to be trying fair and move it around. But a quick follow there. You write in the book that for parents of young children, the privacy talk really should precede the sex talk in some respects because of these same issues.
And we don't mean this as a joke. In fact, as we've been on this book tour one of the things that I feel we didn't give enough attention to in the book is the important role that parents are going to play. And if you think about it, why should a parent talk to their kid about data permanence before they talk to them about sex? Well, it's because they're going to be using the internet faster than the sort of physical maturation process, and sex just won't be relevant for like many years, and data permanence will be when you see how young these kids are getting online.
Jared, I think you should mention, Jared's very upset about something. And we have future parents here in the room, as you're an example of a future parent. What are you upset about?
So I'm very upset about people putting their sonograms online. And my logic, this is actually a campaign of sorts, and I'm going to make T-shirts. You can all have them. What actually bothers me about this is you're actually creating somebody's digital identity before they're even born. I believe that at a minimum, you should have to experience a subtle squint.
So you're arguing that there's a maturational difference between T-1 and T+1 in the baby?
I don't know how early a sonogram appears, but yeah, something like that.
You're clearly not a parent.
Would you put a sonogram on mine?
No, I agree with you. I just think your argument of timing is wrong.
All right, let's take a question from over here. Yes, sir. This is a question for Jared about the pace of these technological changes and their impact on younger generations specifically, and whether the generational process is accelerated.
And thank you, Ian. I should say Ian and I went to grad school together, and he's now a professor here, so it's good to see you again. There's so much to say about how technology is going to transform what is the world's largest demographic, which are young people. Right? When we talk about 5 billion new people coming online, most of them are young. I think the most significant story is going to be around education. If you believe, as we do, that at the core of every single problem in the entire world is bad educational institutions that are screwing things up, then technology will at least be part of the solution, in the sense that every young kid is still going to go to a ramshackle classroom with a teacher that may or may not show up, and they're still going to learn in the classroom through rote memorization. But in the short term, as they come online, they're finally going to have an opportunity to challenge that rote memorization with critical thinking, interaction. They're going to be able to search things when the teacher says it to them and determine for themselves whether it's true or not. But I think in something closer to home, one of the observations that we've been making, and since this is a university setting, we often get asked the question, what do you tell to students that are graduating? Well, what we say to them is, unless you work for Eric, you're going to know more about technology than whoever you're working for. You're the first generation being socialized with high prevalence of these tools, and it's your comparative advantage. And so if there isn't a reverse mentorship program in place, you should institute it in the form of adding it to your job description.
And by the way, this is the new generation gap. I'm struck by the difference, sort of the 20-something model of consuming media, how you think about which sources you depend on, how you learn, how you educate. And the gap is larger than you might think. And so you should be able to exploit that. Every generation exploits the generation gap. That's just yours.
Let me take a question from here. Yes. In a country like China, can you make an argument that some censorship is better than no information at all?
So we've debated this many, many times. So first on Gmail, as far as I know, your Gmail should work just fine here. The Chinese government, and I don't know what level of a dissident you are, but the Chinese government has... So you don't need to tell me. I don't want to know. The Chinese government has hacked into the Gmail accounts for quite a few what they view as dissidents in the United States. And we discovered this as part of our investigation, which really upset us. And they were basically taking the emails and then monitoring people's behaviors. And this is just not okay. We made a decision that we can't work under their system. And they're very clear that their system, they're proud of their system, and they think it's the right solution. And so the honorable choice for us is to say, hey guys, we just don't agree, and we're not willing to be subjected to the constant phone calls. And for people who don't know this, China is the only country that has active dynamic censorship in place. You get a phone call, you have 30 minutes to take this thing down. It has to be taken down of everything, and it's illegal to reveal to you what is being taken down, but I can summarize it by saying it's information that would be embarrassing to the leaders. So for example, the son of the leader was arrested. Right, so that kind of stuff gets censored. Also, if I go to China, everything I say is censored, literally to the point where if I give a press conference, they're not allowed to even mention it. So I've just stopped bothering. I go and I have a great time, but I don't even bother doing press conferences.
2 quick follow-ups there. One is, How do they do it? I mean, it's a country of 1 billion people. You talked about the total noise and the data flowing
I'll
constantly.
tell you technically how they do it is
Yeah.
very simple. There are 7 cross-connected internets within China. There are a set of gateways. They built things which are technically known as proxy caches. Those proxy caches comprise what is known in the vernacular as the Great Chinese Wall, right? The Great Chinese Firewall. And this firewall, basically, when you go to forbidden content, it shuts it down. There's evidence, although I don't know this, but there's evidence that they're now using machine learning, which is an AI technique people here will understand who are studying computer science, to look for the encrypted traffic and then identify the IP addresses of the people who have encrypted traffic, which you can detect. You can't decrypt it, but then shut them down too, on the presumption that if you're using encryption, you must be guilty of something.
I mean, it's got to be
It's seriously evil.
remarkably sophisticated.
These guys are very smart.
Yeah.
But one
They're just wrong, you know.
One caveat to this is Eric and I make the argument that there's no autocracy in the world, including China, that has been fully tested. So even China, 1.3 billion people, only has 600 million people who are connected today. And if I can generalize, they're largely Han Chinese living in urban parts of the country. So you're going to have 700 million new people connecting in the next decade who are in rural areas, who are ethnically and religiously diverse, who are socioeconomically sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, and who, until they come online, will really have no visibility into what their life looks like relative to life in the cities. And I don't think we can predict what happens when that takes place. It's a noisier China, and it's certainly harder for the government.
Yeah. Let's take a question from this section. Yes, ma'am. This question is about how digital technology might affect business practices and also domestic government policies. I would add a third because you talk about it, disaster response.
So I think it's a difference. I think the game changer is with more technology, things become proactive. Governments are forced to be proactive rather than reactive. So in the case of Bangladesh, I think it's up to over 1,000 people dead now. This is an incredible tragedy. But it shouldn't take 1,000+ people killed in a factory because of poor conditions for people to start having these conversations. So in the future, when everybody's online, they'll take pictures of all the problems. They'll take video of all the problems, and you'll essentially usher in an era where people will be able to whistleblow and have it matter.
So let me give you the counter argument. I agree with that. So we were in Nairobi, and we met with a group that had gotten a Google grant, and they were basically dissidents like I used to hang out with in the 60s, right? These are people who basically they think the government is screwed up, and they're busy recording it. And they had lots and lots of information about the bad behavior of this government official and this government official, and their job was to publicize it. And because the press is relatively free there, it's on their websites, everybody's talking about it and so forth. The country still elected one of the guys. So there's a limit to how far information will go. So for purposes of argument, we all get ourselves together, we publicize all the problems in Bangladesh, these terrible worker situations, the building workers, and nothing happens. And why? Well, because the people running the country don't care, or they're not elected, or they're not responsive, or they're busy being criminals, or what have you. So I worry that there's a limit to how much this kind of monitoring, which is obviously very important, it runs up against a real limit.
Got it. I'll take a question. Let me, just because it was hard to hear for this part of the room and over, this gentleman said, you've articulated some interesting dimensions to a future age, but he's having a hard time seeing this adding up to a broader vision, a broader worldview of what will happen. So if you could summarize how you see this playing out, how would you define it?
Well, let me actually do technical, and maybe, Jared, you can talk about how society will react. So a sort of general summary is that if you're in the developing world today, you have 3.4 billion phones are in active use, up to 6 billion phone numbers. Those 3.4 billion phones, the majority of them are feature phones. That means they're SMS, they're inexpensive, $30, $40 phones. They don't have browsers. Those phones will get smart browsers. The majority of them, it looks like, will be Android, which I'm particularly pleased with. And as the technology comes down, the phone that you have, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, will come, instead of costing $200, it'll cost $130, and then $100, and eventually, because of Moore's Law. Along the way, if the country is at all rational, they'll have competitive telco in the private sector. The telcos will provide 3G, 4G connectivity, and then the race is on. People will be connected, and people will be authoring, content, websites, applications, e-commerce. They want what we have just as much as we wanted it too. They're no different. So they're going to build the websites, the commerce stores, the fun games, and so forth in their own languages. Here in America and in the developed world, we're going to see an explosion in bandwidth. You'll see this. Google, for example, is doing the gigabit fiber project. So a gigabit is like life-changing even for us. And America is now number 8 in bandwidth performance, up from number 16, I might add. But we have a long way to go from, for example, Tokyo, which is 100 megabits, or South Korea, which is 160 megabits. But with all that bandwidth, it'll be possible to build really interesting applications. In the book, we talk about the following scenario, which is sort of an opening scenario. You wake up in the morning, and there's a screen on the wall, and and you've all chosen this and opted into it, and it sort of knows what your schedule is, and it's analyzed your day. And it's analyzed your day, and you say, do I need to wake up? And it says, no. You don't need to wake up. Because we know your boss is going to be late anyway, and you're not late for your flight, and you never go to class anyway. Or, yes, you need to get out of bed because it looks like there's going to be a test, a surprise test, because we notice everyone is rushing to class and you're late. So this kind of an assistant is a powerful, powerful idea. And obviously that's a specific scenario, but think of having an infinitely intelligent digital assistant. And ultimately, I would argue that the solutions to America's problems are around creativity. And if you could spend less time worrying about what you're doing and let the computer do all that, and you can worry about being creative, having fun, leading, doing the things that humans do best, we're going to have a pretty good decade.
And I would argue, just to be brief, our whole understanding of power and influence is going to change. So as individuals, we can all remember a time where technology was a sideshow. We didn't really think it had serious implications for who we are. Now I think we would all agree that our online identity is at a minimum as important as our physical identity, and given more people will know us online in the future than will ever physically encounter us, it matters a lot. So it's certainly no longer a sideshow. For states, it's the same thing. I remember when I joined the Bush administration in 2006, nobody talked about technology. It was called, in government circles, it was called UFace, FaceTube. I'm trying to remember some of the other sort of,
Really?
Yeah, it was incredible. The State Department.
Was this the Bush administration?
It's not a partisan thing. It was,
Yes!
The State Department did not get email until Colin Powell became Secretary of State, just to sort of show you.
No, they got it. They just deleted it. They didn't read it.
Well, you used to have to go to a special room to check even unclassified email. Now you just have to go to a special room to check.
Or use Gmail. We'll continue. We'll continue.
So with states, we sort of moved into an era where cyberspace is certainly mattering more and more. People are talking more and more about cybersecurity, but they're no longer siloing the conversation. So now we don't talk about cyber terrorism and terrorism, we just talk about terrorism. We don't talk about cyber warfare as something separate from warfare, it's part of it. So what you're going to see in the future, in the new digital age, is all of the conversations around cyberspace and all the conversations around physical space essentially being intertwined together in one conversation about what our international system looks like.
But I think the other way to ask that question, Jared, is with this empowerment of individuals, what changes in politics? Does democracy get better or worse? It certainly probably gets louder.
Well, one could argue that loud is more fair, right? So is it really a pure democracy if only a couple million people out of tens of millions of people have a voice? What about all the rural people who can't sort of go into the street and complain? What about all the people who are disconnected and don't know what's happening? So, for instance, if China just gets louder with 1.3 billion voices, well, they have 1.3 billion people. If we have 300 million people in the United States, and that's millions of more voices and more activity, well, everybody should be able to say their piece. And if you find it annoying, well, I would find it more annoying to cut voices off.
I mean, but as noble as that sounds, certainly even the founders and framers of this country were worried about, the ultimate limits of democratic governance and put constraints on that as well. So could there be problems with, 1.3 billion voices in the conversation?
Well, of course. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of individuals being able. I mean, look at the Tea Party movement is a perfect example. This is like a fraction of the Republican Party and think about how, as a small fraction of the party, they've been loud enough to influence GOP politics. I think that's a sort of perfect example. In terms of the numbers, they don't match the megaphone.
I'll give you another example. In Myanmar, Burma, when we were there was this terrible, terrible religious violence at a city right above where we were. And 35 people were killed. They were Muslim, killed by Buddhists in some complicated dispute. The government eventually squashed it. And online, because it was a new thing, people invented all sorts of stories which were far worse than the already terrible things going on. And because they'd never really had such information, no one was quite sure what to do about this information. Right? So that's an example where the amplifier can be used by people who are zealots, who are aggrieved in ways that may not be quite fair in our sense of fairness.
When you go to a country like Myanmar or to North Korea, what do they want to know from you? What are they asking you about?
Well, one of our most interesting observations about Myanmar is we were told before going there less than 1% of the population has access to the internet. It's amazing how many people had heard of it, even though they'd never used it, even though they'd never sat in front of a computer, they'd never held a tablet, they'd never held a smartphone. And so, attribute that to advertising, attribute it to something else, I don't know, but the idea of the internet has permeated these societies for better or for worse. What was interesting is, as a result, they start asking you a lot of questions. In some respects, one of the problem, though, is more connectivity heightens expectations, and I think people have an inflated sense of what technology can do for them. So you talk to people in Myanmar, and they talk about the internet like it's the American dream. It's going to make them richer, it's going to make them more free, it's going to make them more prosperous. And just like the American dream came crushing down for people because a dream alone can't help you achieve success, so too could you imagine challenges in these environments.
Well, you might not want to be the first president after the internet arrives and there's liberation, because with liberation comes the reality of all the problems of the society, and many of these countries don't have systems that we take for granted, like the rule of law, an independent judiciary. So we're sitting there talking to Aung San Suu Kyi, who's essentially the Nelson Mandela of that part of the world, an incredibly impressive woman. And she's talking about trying to get the judicial system not to report to the government, right? We take it for granted that you have the separation of powers from 200 years ago. It's not normal in some of these other countries.
I want to close, I know we're running up on time here, by talking about one huge element that has been largely missing from this conversation, other than a few oblique references, and frankly largely missing from the book in a big way. And that has to do not with the issues with nation states, or even with non-state actors in a political sense, but with multinational corporations, with the business community. And there's certainly a lot of concerns already in this country about privacy, issues with individual rights and how that relates to companies and corporations. So what does the future hold in that realm? How can we be assured that non-state actors like multinational corporations, where there's a significant economic motive for them, will actually respect our security and our rights and our privacy?
Well, I think that there's several ways there's sort of several questions there. I'll take the privacy and security one first. When we sat down to write this book, we made a decision to look at privacy and security, not just in the context of the first 2 billion that are already online, but we wanted to go out to some of these places, Libya, Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, and see what people think about privacy and security. And what we found in a lot of these environments, they've never had any privacy. And so for them, privacy and security are intertwined. So this was sort of an interesting observation that we took away. And so this is a plug to broaden the conversation to the entire world, not just locally. That being said, we argue that in the future, companies are going to have to fight even harder to safeguard privacy and security of users, or they're going to go someplace else. And by the way,
those users will go someplace else.
Absolutely. Yes. And by the way, where the stakes are highest are in these environments where, in addition to those concerns, you also have autocracies, you also have all these other issues. So companies, you asked about the future role of a multinational company. It's all the things that you would expect today. Plus, think about all of the issues that essentially our industry is going to inherit just by virtue of the environments where people are coming online.
I would say that we came to the conclusion after writing the book that companies have a greater responsibility than we thought, because American companies, for example, operating outside of the U.S. have to operate by U.S. law, which means we properly and correctly, by the way, have to hire women, have to hire minorities, can't discriminate, we're not allowed to engage in corruption and so forth. We set a standard the exporting of our values is a good thing, in my view, not a bad thing. Similarly, the products that we build are often used in ways we did not anticipate. Jared, when he was in Iran, talked about how people use Bluetooth initially for dating and communications and sort of private chatting, and then once the Green Revolution took over, people used it it was the only way to get information out. And yet, I'm sure the developers of Bluetooth did not sit there and say, we're going to become the central technological link for that. There are plenty of companies which sort of they don't understand the way in which their stuff's going to be used outside the US and the cultural impact that it has. I think Google has been through that, and we understand it extremely well. And my guess is that this much younger generation of new tech companies doesn't fully understand the responsibility and the sort of awesomeness of it in that sense.
And Eric, a short final question to you, and Jared, please jump in. What advice do you have for those of us in this room right now thinking about the issues that you've talked about and knowing that in the next several decades we're going to see some tremendous change in our individual lives and in the geopolitical
I think you
world?
should use Chrome. Why should you use Chrome? If you're not using Chrome, you're not cool. Right? How am I doing in the coolness factor here in Chicago?
Killed it.
But you should use Chrome because it's the safest browser. It checks the sources in ways that the other browsers don't. If you're using Chrome and you're using two-factor authentication and you're not downloading malware to your computer, you've got a pretty good chance of having your privacy and security respected. But I think one of the sort of core messages here is that you have a responsibility too, that companies and the government are not going to sort of fix all this for you. It is the Wild West in some sense, and you can make mistakes. And if you're concerned, if you want an example, think about this guy who works for the Associated Press who had his Twitter account hacked because he had an insufficiently unique password. How does he feel after $165 billion worth of losses?
I guess he's fired.
Well, we don't know. Yeah. Jared would have fired him.
The book is called The New Digital Age, Reshaping the Future of People, Nations, and Business. It's the work of Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen. Eric and Jared, thank you both so very much.
Okay, thank you all.